The COVID-19 induced recession of 2020 was a severe global economic downturn from the coronavirus pandemic, which caused a recession and is the worst global economic crisis since the Great Depression and has had a dramatic impact on Australia. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced national and widespread restrictions impacting about 160,000 of small businesses and thousands of other businesses in Australia, causing mass unemployment and a huge financial struggle as many people begin to lose their jobs overnight. 70% of businesses in the hospitality sector were forced to reduce the hours of their staff, and 43% of people were sacked or placed on unpaid leave. Unemployment was a major concern for the government. The firm sector of the business cycle began shutting down along with the household sector known as consumers, which led to mass hoarding as people began to stock up on food, fearing that there would be a lockdown. In response to this, the government introduced a payment named Job Seeker that will replace unemployment benefits, which will be available to those in economic downturn due to the pandemic.
Last week we talked to you about an unemployment rate of 7%, but things have moved a lot further, a lot more quickly than that. And of course over the weekend with the shutdowns, that has changed the face of the outlook for the economy quite significantly. We now expect that the unemployment rate will reach 11.1% by the end of June, and that will involve 814,000 job losses over that period.
This helped reduce the damage which the virus caused to employees, which allowed 1.5 million Australians receiving this allowance. The graph represents a job seeker and youth allowance trend rate in Australia during the COVID-19 recession. In 2020, the job seeker/youth allowance rate in the Northern Territory peaked at a rate of 15%, and the highest unemployment rate in Queensland was at 7.7%.
The scale of the impact from the COVID-19 induced recession can be measured in terms of declines in gross domestic product, also known as GDP. The pandemic caused a huge fall in Australia's GDP as unemployment rose significantly and restrictions on borders began to tighten. GDP is the measure of a country's net output and is a way of measuring a nation's economic health. GDP can be broken down into many different components, and this graph shows all these components of GDP and how the COVID-19 induced recession affected each one. Accommodation and food is shown as by far the hardest hit sector, with output down a whopping 39% in the 3 months to June 30. In the June quarter of 2020, Australia's GDP plunged by 7%. In response to this fall, the education sector adopted online teaching, although it has still suffered severe income losses. The hospitality sector was heavily affected from the loss of business due to closures. After all the impact of the pandemic, Australia's GDP was negative in 2 consecutive quarters, falling by 0.3% and 7%, placing the Australian economy officially in recession after a run of 29 years of continuous growth.
Impact on consumer choice. Consumer choice by definition refers to decisions that consumers make in regard to goods and services. These decisions have changed dramatically from both the pandemic itself as well as the induced recession from COVID-19. In this graph, we can see a noticeable reduction in how much consumers have been spending on food services. In the COVID-19 recession, consumers have also cut back on accommodation, recreation and transportation services. There are many things that have been shaping consumer behaviour and choices. In one of the latest surveys on Australian consumers, 21.3% of respondents said that they still do not feel comfortable going to a store for purchases because of the pandemic. However, because of the lockdown, there has been a dramatic increase in demand for household products like toilet paper, as well as essential food items like rice, flour and pasta. Businesses haven't been able to meet the demand for these items, and their supply is lower than the demand. This results in an increase in price as consumer demand increases, stated in the law of demand. In conclusion, the COVID-19 induced recession of 2020, which affected Australia, has led to a major concern for unemployment, plunging percentages of GDP and changes in consumer choice. Fortunately, the government has implemented the job seeker and youth allowance to lower unemployment rates and has supported numerous businesses doing so, which has helped to lower the effect of the recession on Australia.